What a great song. Thank you, Holly, for being back. A little bit ago, someone said, how neat that you and Karen Kennedy have birthday in the same week. So they said it's like a couple of birds. You have a songbird and a dodo bird. This is Labor Day weekend. You have to admit, it's a strange holiday. We call it Labor Day, but we try to do as little labor as possible during this time. Most working people have Monday off. And now that I think about it, no one has wished me a happy Labor Day. We don't get Labor Day cards. We don't decorate the house for Labor Day. We don't give Labor Day gifts. The florists and greeting card organizations, industries have not learned how to capitalize on Labor Day. And it can be a bad weekend for church because everyone wants to travel for that final getaway before fall arrives. When it comes to the topic of Labor Day and actually laboring, the topic can mean different things to different people. Someone has written that there are 4 types of bones in the world. 4 types of bones. The wish bones, who spend their time wishing someone else would do all the work. The jaw bones, who do all the talking but don't do any work. The knuckle bones, who knock all the work other people are trying to do. And then you have the backbones, who shoulder the load and do the work. Truly, Labor Day is different things to different people. To the factory or office worker, it may be a day off. For police officers, they have to deal with extra traffic. EMS personnel, sometimes there's alcohol-related incidents and they're going out on calls for that. Labor Day can be a tough day. For farmers and ranchers, just another day to feed the cattle and work in the fields. For preachers, it's an opportunity to talk about work. But the reality is, work is a very important part of God's will for people. We read in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verses 10 and 11. In fact, when we were with you, this is what we commanded you. If anyone isn't willing to work, he should not eat. Before we move to verse 11, let's look at this. Paul is writing to the church at Thessalonica, and he's actually reiterating this. He's emphasizing something because it's so important. He says, when we were with you. He says, when I was there in person, when we came and we're there, we're evangelizing, we're ministering to you. When we were there, we told you something. And I'm reminding you now that if anyone isn't willing to work, he should not eat. It's important enough, he says, you got to hear this again. People tend to forget. We all tend to forget something. And you hear it that second time, third time, fourth time, you've got a better chance of recalling that. And that's exactly what Paul is saying to them here. I told you before, I'm telling you again. If you're not willing to work, you don't get to eat. And we have people who don't subscribe to that theory. It seems that that's the case in today's world. Verse 11. For we hear that there are some among you who walk irresponsibly, not working at all, but interfering with the work of others. It seems like the wishbones, the jawbones, and the knuckle bones have been around and doing their thing since the 1st century. This morning, let's look at how God's precious gift, His holy word, addresses the topic of work, determine exactly how that fits into our daily lives. 4 things we're going to look at this morning. Number 1, God has always honored and provided work. God has honored and provided work. A large company is feeling that it's time for a shake-up. They hired this new CEO. And the new boss decided it's time to get rid of all the slackers. So on a tour of the facilities, he knows this guy who's just simply leaning against the wall. The room's full of workers, and the CEO seizes this opportunity to really make an impression, to send a message to these workers. I got this guy who's just slacking off, like leaning over here against the wall. He walks up to this guy and says, how much money do you make each week? The guy looked a little puzzled, said, $300. CEO whips out $1,200, said, there's a month's severance pay, get out of here. The guy lifts the money, puts it in his pocket, and walks out. CEO is feeling kind of proud because, he has sent a real powerful message to the workers. He said, anyone know who that guy was? And one voice from the back said, that's the delivery guy from Papa John's. God has always honored work. It's something He has demonstrated Himself. He's modeled work for us. We look at Genesis 2, verse 2. By the 7th day, God completed His work that He had done. What did He completed? His work. And He rested on the 7th day from all His work that He had done. God is working before the earth was created, before all time. God was working. Well, and God does appreciate the value of resting. Nothing wrong with resting. It's an essential part of God's plan for us. He appreciates that value, but God's a worker himself. He created us in his image and gave us work to do. Genesis 2:15. The Lord God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to watch over it. He didn't put Adam in the Garden of Eden, didn't put a hammock up there, didn't have a helper that he created with just some palm leaves to fan Adam and keep him cool. He put him in the garden to work it. Even from the beginning, God gave men work to do. I mean, do you think that there was a time in the Garden of Eden where Adam's having to go to the time clock and punch in? When there's that whistle blows when he's supposed to start his shift like Fred Flintstone had? Is that the way it worked? There was work, and God intended for Adam to do that. When Jesus came to earth, God honored work, and he honored workers because the report was first given to working shepherds. We read in Luke 2:8. In the same region, shepherds were staying out in the fields and keeping watch at night over their flocks. God says, you guys are working. You're doing your job, and I appreciate that. And I'm going to give you some really, really good news tonight. Jesus himself learned to trade as a carpenter. We read in Mark 6, verse 3. Isn't this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? So Jesus learned to trade as a carpenter. He's working with his hands. Jesus chose working men as his disciples. We know that Peter, Andrew, James, and John were all fishermen. The Bible doesn't tell us necessarily what Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, Thaddeus, James, Thomas, and Judas did for a living, but I think it's safe to assume that they worked at some trade, some craft. They're doing something to help provide for themselves and for their families. Jesus, though, called them from those labors to become fishers of men. He still would keep them working, but it's just a different type of work. And then came the time for Jesus' disciples to get down to work, where what we say the rubber meets the road. In Luke 10:1, after this, the Lord appointed 70 others, and he sent them ahead of him in pairs to every town and place where he himself was about to go. So he's got 70 people. He says, okay, you guys go out. You're going in pairs. I'm going to be following you. Go on out and get to work. Remember how John the Baptist was also out there doing work ahead of Jesus' arrival? That's what's going on. But Jesus had some very specific instructions for these 70. We read in verse 7. Remain in the same house, eating and drinking what they offer, for the worker is worthy of his wages. Don't be moving from house to house. So what is Jesus saying to them? Don't be moving from house to house. He didn't want them going from one house to another begging. Because Jesus told them, go out without any money. Don't take anything with you. Don't get any supplies. You're going to get your provisions for the people that you're going to be ministering to. And I don't want you going and begging from house to house. He expected his disciples to earn their keep. Because if they're out there ministering, discipling, then these people are going to provide for them. So with all this in mind, we've got this history. It's biblical history that shows us that work is something God created, God wants his people to do. Then why do people have this attitude, this mindset that work is a bad thing? Well, that's because sin caused work to become unpleasant. In Genesis 3, 17 and 19. And he said to Adam, because you listened to your wife's voice and ate from the tree about which I commanded you, do not eat from it. The ground is cursed because of you. You will eat from it by means of painful labor all the days of your life. We have actions, we have consequences of our actions. He said, you ate from the tree, I told you not to. Now you're going to have to work. You're going to have to work the ground, and it's going to be hard for you to get the results that were given to you. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. You eat bread by the sweat of your brow until you return to the ground, since you were taken from it. For you are dust, and you will return to dust. So he's saying, your whole life, this is what you got to face. You created a situation, these are the consequences, Adam, that you're going to deal with. Adam enjoyed tending the Garden of Eden until sin changed things. Sometimes we think of work as a necessary evil. We have to have money in order to live. To pay the rent, pay the mortgage, to pay the electric bill, buy the groceries, all these things. It's a necessary evil that we have to do because we need the money to live on. But if we don't have to work, we choose not to do it. Some people do as little as possible. The idea seems to be getting more money for doing less work. And this leads to the idea of someone else doing the work for you. During the illustrious career of S. Parks Cabot, he was a great preacher in Brooklyn, New York, many years ago. It was the Central Congregational Church. He was called to a humble home. And there on this thin, clean bed lay a dying woman, one of his church members. She's nearing the border. She's ready to cross over, but she craves some words of comfort from her pastor before she starts his final journey. He sat there and listened to this distressed and dying parishioner as she recounted her life. For many years, she'd been the breadwinner for a large family. Her days were long, laboriously spent, earning money to pay the bills. In fact, she was the cleaning woman for many of the homes in the neighborhood. After talking about her unsung and unremarkable career, she turned to her minister and wistfully asked, "When I stand before my Maker, what should I say?" And Pastor Cabot had already noticed the calluses on her hands and realized now more than ever how unselfishly she had lived her life. So he, in response to her question, "What should I say to my Maker?" he very affectionately and with a comforting voice said, "Show him your hands." What would God see if he looked at our hands? Would he see the result of our labor? Some people choose to be employers. And we're grateful that people are willing to open a business, create large businesses. They choose to be employers. They hire other employees to do that work. But in America, unfortunately, labor and management are often adversarial. They're in a battle many, many times. Labor wants the most money, most benefits for the least amount of work. And management wants the most productivity for the least amount of money. So this creates that adversarial relationship. Labor Day was actually first celebrated here in America on September 5th, 1882. But it wasn't until 1894 that it became a national holiday. And this was an effort that was encouraged by President Grover Cleveland to reconcile with the labor movement and prevent further violence. Think of violence. In the spring of that year was the famous Pullman strike. It took place in Pullman, Illinois, and this is a town between Chicago and Gary, Indiana. This is the home of the Pullman Palace Car Company. They made luxurious train cars, dining cars, sleeping cars for the railroads. Some 3,000 workers went on strike because their wages were reduced. They go on strike, the federal government sends in the militia, and several workers were killed during this. Well, President Cleveland wants to try to make amends and smooth this over as best he can, so he suggests that we have Labor Day as a national holiday to recognize the working people. How many of you had chores to do when you were a kid? Seeing lots of hands, lots of people shaking their head. Have you noticed today how some kids won't do chores? And some of you are shaking your head, yes. They expect mom and dad to just give them money. They shouldn't have to do anything. They shouldn't have to earn it. They shouldn't have to help around the house. You should just give me whatever I need or I want. It seems that we're raising a generation that doesn't expect to have to work. They don't want to work. They expect the things to be given to them for doing nothing. Well, it sounds good, but someone's got to do the work. Work is a four-letter word, but it's not a bad word. So let's talk about work systems then. Let's talk about God's work systems versus the world's work systems. In Ephesians chapter 6, we read, "Slaves, obey your human masters with fear and trembling, in the sincerity of your heart as to Christ." I mean, think about that phrase. Obey your human masters. Now, we're not slaves. But now Paul is writing to those who at the time were enslaved. But he's saying, even as slaves, obey your human masters with fear and trembling in the sincerity of your heart. Not because you have to, not because they're standing over you with a club or a whip, but in the sincerity of your heart. This is a sort of a tribute to Christ when you serve in that fashion. So he's setting the groundwork for them as the mindset, the attitude they should take when they go into the workplace. Verse 6, "Don't work only while being watched in order to please men, but as slaves of Christ. Do God's will from your heart." Some of you may have heard that there's a trend going on right now in the corporate world. It's called quiet quitting. Quiet quitting. That's where employees are doing as little as they possibly can and still maintain their employment. The work from home has given many people to do that. One lady recently lost her job because she posted TikTok video. I mean, you can tell this is She's a real genius. She posts this TikTok video of herself sitting around the house doing nothing. She's got the caption on there, "This is when I'm supposed to be at work." Kidneys. Real kidneys. But that's the mindset that some people have. But even then, in the first century, Paul's writing about this type of attitude. Don't work only while being watched in order to please men, but as slaves of Christ, do God's will from your heart. Serve with a good attitude as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good each one does, slave or free, he will receive this back from the Lord. And masters, treat your slaves the same way, without threatening them, because you know that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. So he's given direction. You're a business owner? Great. If you happen to be a worker? Great. But either way, serve others. Serve to the best of your ability, and do it with a mindset that you are serving Christ. Now, would you think that these verses would describe most workplaces today? The people are serving from the goodness of their heart, and the business owners are treating their people really, really well from the goodness of their heart.
No.
I'm afraid that's not the case. And slavery has been abolished, but many workers think they're treated like slaves, and many employers have the attitude like a master, and they treat their employees like slaves. God cares about how we conduct business and how we treat others. We will face judgment. All of us will face judgment, both employers and employees. The Christian cannot separate his business life, his work life, from his spiritual life. We can't say, I'm a Christian on Sunday, but then live like a heathen on Monday through Friday. See, life is about much, much more than just money. This young person's going in for a job interview, and at the end of the interview, the human resources person asked this young accountant who's just fresh out of school, what starting salary you were thinking about? And this young graduate, just without hesitation, said, I was thinking $100,000, thereabouts, just depending upon the package that goes with that. The interviewer said, well, what would you say to a package of 5 weeks vacation, full medical and dental, company retirement funded up to 50% of salary, executive share option scheme, profit-related pay, and a company car leased every 2 years, say a 5 Series BMW. And this young accountant says, you're kidding. And the interviewer said, you're right, but you started it. Do people expect a lot for nothing? Sometimes. But the reality is money, we work for money, but money is an opportunity to help others. Paul writes to the church at Ephesus, the thief must no longer steal. Instead, he must do honest work with his own hands, so he has something to share with anyone in need. So when we work, it's not just about us and what we can get from it, but what can we do, the money we earn, what can we do to help others who are in need? And if we do, though, like some of the people did in Thessalonica, refuse to earn any money, we couldn't give money to the church. And the church couldn't pay its bills, and the church then couldn't help needy people. These are things that they fit in with God's plan. So we've talked about God's work system versus the world's work system. Let's look at number 3, a higher work standard for Christians. Some people don't mind having a higher standard, striving for that. Some people say, let's go with the low standard. Let's keep that bar low, and I can attain that more readily. But God has a higher work standard for Christians. In Colossians 3, verses 22 through 24, slaves, obey your human masters in everything. Don't work only while being watched in order to please men, but work wholeheartedly, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, do it enthusiastically, as something done for the Lord and not for men, knowing that you will receive the reward of an inheritance from the Lord. You serve the Lord Christ. Again, Paul's writing saying, you're going to get your reward later. It may not be right now, but folks, we don't have to have a big reward right now. That's not the world's viewpoint, but the reality is our reward will come later, particularly when we're serving. It says you serve the Lord Christ. And if that's the mindset we take into the business world, if that's the mindset we take into our homes, into our neighborhoods, into our church, then our rewards will come. Christian employees should do more than expected because they work for the Lord. Christian employers do the best not the least they can for the employees, because they also work for the Lord. Here's a question for you. Suppose a Christian has a job that needs to be done. And two people said, I can do the job, I can do the job. And one says, I will do it for 150. The other says, I'll do it for 100. Now, whom should you hire in that situation? You could hire the person for the $100, and many people would, because that saves you $50. That's a 1/3 discount. But the reality is, maybe we should hire this person for $100 and pay them $150 because the job is worth $150. And if the job is worth $150, then the worker is earning $150. He's worth that as the job is worth that. Jesus says in Matthew 7:12, therefore, whatever you want others to do for you, do also the same for them. This is the law and prophets. If you're working for someone, wouldn't you like for them to pay you what the job is actually worth rather than as little as they can get by with? So Jesus says, do the same for others. If an employee can get by with shoddy work, he has no right to do so because he works for the Lord. Christians know that people are much more important than property. The Bible tells us repeatedly to love one another. It's vital that we treat them right. Listen again to Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, do it enthusiastically as something done for the Lord and not for men. We have to admit there are rewards for doing a good job. USS Astoria was the first U.S. cruiser ship to engage the Japanese during the Battle of Savo Islands in World War II. It was a night action that fought August 8th and 9th in 1942. The Astoria scored 2 direct hits on the Imperial flagship Chikoa. She was badly damaged and sank shortly after noon. But the Astoria also was hit. About 2 o'clock in the morning, a young Midwesterner signaling third class, Elgin Staples, was swept overboard by the blast when the Astoria's number 1 8-inch gun turret exploded. He's wounded in both legs by shrapnel. He's in semi-shock. He's kept afloat by this small life belt that he's managed to trigger with a simple mechanism that's on it. It's the only thing that's keeping him afloat. So 4 hours later, around 6 o'clock in the morning, Elgin Staples rescued by a passing destroyer and returned to the Astoria. Now, it's in danger of sinking. The captain's attempting to save the cruiser. The effort failed, and soon again, Elgin Staples found himself back in the water. Close to noon, he's picked up again. So he's had 8 hours now of time in the water, this time by the USS President Jackson. He was one of 500 survivors of the battle who were evacuated. And safely on board for ship for the first time now, he closely examined this life belt that has served him so well. It was manufactured by Firestone Tire and Rubber Company in Akron, Ohio, and bore a registration number. Given leave, time to go home and recuperate, Navy Seaman Elgin Staples told this story to his mother, who worked for Firestone. He's telling her, how he was on shift, he's thrown over, this belt saves him, another ship picks him up, takes him back to Astoria. Soon he's back in the water, the belt saves him yet again. And he tells her about this registration number. He remembered everything about the belt. And he asked her about this number that's on it. She said, well, there's a number that everyone has that, because when we do inspections and such, it's how we identify who's done what work. So he quoted the number to her. It was his mother's number. Wow. Are the rewards for the work you do well? And we know the answer is yes. God has a higher plan for Christians in the terms of our work. Fourth, God has a work plan for us. It's undeniable that God intends for us to work. Now, not everyone likes that message. Some people prefer to do things their own way. Lynn's uncle Walter and his granddaughter Samantha is here with her boyfriend Joe. Good to have you folks with us this morning. Walter and his girlfriend Mary were downtown Nashville today, going around the inner loop, and they come around to the Metro Center exit. And they pull off, they're there on the ramp, there's a Cadillac in front of them with a man and a woman in it. And there on the side of the X-ramp is a guy who's holding up the sign. It's got the typical thing, homeless, hungry, veteran, God bless, anything helps, the type of language that they have. And Walter and Mary sit behind this Cadillac, and all of a sudden the driver's door opens on the Cadillac, And the driver hops out and goes over to the guy who has the sign and takes the sign from him. And the guy who's on the side of the road goes over and gets in the Cadillac and drives off with the woman. And Mary looked at Walter and said, "What just happened here?" Walter said, "Shift change." Some people don't want to work. And they're going to work harder staying out of work than they would go into a job. But God's given us life. He's given us a blueprint for how to live. And some people call that blueprint the Bible. In John 5:17, but Jesus responded to them, "My Father is still working, and I am working also." Well, if God is still working, and Jesus is working, then we've got no excuse. We've got no way of talking ourselves out of working, because we've got the models right there in front of us. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, but we encourage brothers to do even more, not less, do even more, to seek to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, and to work with your own hands as we commanded you. Paul is giving this same message as he's traveling around, as he's on his missionary journeys. He's telling people, work. You've got to work. The church won't be built by itself. People won't be reached by themselves. You've got to work. But also you've got to work to feed yourself and to help others during this process of this thing we call a life. In Luke 10, let's go back to Jesus. He told them, because we're talking about God's plan for us and our work, he told them, the harvest is abundant, but the workers are few. Therefore, pray to the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest. The harvest is abundant, but the workers are few. And when we think about, if you've got your bulletin there, you see the handout there about the Tennessee missions emphasis. Why do we do support of various missions? Because the harvest is abundant, but the workers are few. And we support it every way we possibly can, the workers that are out there doing the field, taking care of the thing, reaching people, planting seeds, nourishing seeds. Because we want to help people understand there's a Lord who serves and loves them. It pays both in this life and in our next to do our very best. How we carry our Christian principles into the workplace is very, very important. In fact, our work performance can often become a Christian ministry. This gives work new meaning, a new dignity when we do that. We can't claim to be Christians if our Christianity is only a one-day-a-week affair. God does care what we do Monday through Friday, whether employee or employer. There's great encouragement knowing that this is Labor Day weekend. Let's be thankful for the health that we have to do our jobs. Be thankful for our jobs. Let's certainly do the work that we have to the best of our abilities.